All right. Hi, everybody. Jane here, and I am here today with Marilyn Brokaw Hall, and she is the author of The Mothman's Vengeance as well as The Ringmaster's Secrets. So we are so grateful to have you here today with us, Marilyn.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're here to talk about researching and on a larger way, incorporating real life events or legends, things that exist out of fiction, out of our fictional stories. So you've done that with your book, Mothman's Vengeance. Would you tell us a little bit about what the book's about?
Mothman's Vengeance, it's a historical fantasy fiction book, and it's based on the legend of Mothman. So I thought I'd start off by telling you a little bit about who Mothman is. Back in November of 1966, there were two married couples in Point Pleasant that reported that they had seen a winged creature and in the abandoned missions plant that was used in World War II, and it's now called the TNT area there in Point Pleasant. But people were really concerned at the time that the creature was either from a UFO or possibly it been created by radioactive chemicals from the underground bunkers there that might have leaked into the water around the water supply around the area. So then a month later, after the sighting of Mothman there, that's when the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant on the Ohio River between Point Pleasant and Gallipolis fell. And there were 46 people that were killed at that time. So, and then there was also this rumor that when Chief Cornstalk was murdered at Fort Randolph in Point Pleasant, that before he died, he actually cursed the entire area. And then over the years, after they had like multiple floods there and that kind of thing, a lot of disasters. So then just with this bridge falling, that was just like the final disaster of that. And then that is where, between those two things, is kind of how Mothman was created there in Point Pleasant. You were asking me about it, Mothman Vengeance, historical fantasy fiction about this supernatural character. And it's basically how Mothman stalks his victims in one family over many generations. So the prologue starts back in 1774 when he's murdered and moves forward into the 1960s.
Okay, interesting. What made you decide to incorporate Mothman into your story? Have you always been interested in Mothman, or was it something you recently came across, or why Mothman?
Well, actually, when I was 11, that's when all this other stuff happened, when the Mothman was first seen over there. And I had older male cousins that loved to tell me scary stories. So when they came to our house one night and wanted to have a private conversation with my dad, I, of course, wanted to hear what they had to say. And so they were talking about Mothman, about the rumors that were going around, and they wanted to go night fishing, but they were afraid and they weren't sure if they were going to be safe or not. So, of course, after me hearing their conversation of being scared, I knew that I personally needed to be scared. And so I wouldn't go out of the house for like 2 weeks, afraid of Mothman. But then one night I heard this noise outside. So I got my flashlight and shined it out the window, and lo and behold, red eyes were looking back at me, which actually terrified me at the time. And so I told my dad that I thought that Mothman might be outside because there were red eyes. Well, actually, it was a Black Panther, which was probably even more scarier.
Right. The panther could eat you. I feel that.
Right. Yeah, so we did. We actually had a couple Black Panthers in our area that summer. And that is how I got interested in Mothman. And then later on, I married someone from Point Pleasant, which, we were able to share that enjoyment of the moth creature and talk about that.
Okay. So you were interested in Mothman and you already had some background of it because you'd heard the legends. Did you start researching before you really wrote your book, or did you research as you went, or did you write your first draft and then go back? I mean, how was your research process incorporated into your writing process?
I started writing the book, but then I was really interested in Chief Cornstalk, and I wanted to know more about what happened to him at the fort, why was he murdered, and so I did a lot of research on that part to find out more about the Shawnee tribe and Chief Cornstalk.
Okay, so you knew certain aspects of your story, but you had to go back and kind of fill in blanks for places you didn't really know yet. Was that accurate?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what kind of research did you do? Did you look for stuff online? Did you go to museums? Did you interview people? I mean, how did you collect this research?
There is a Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant, and it has tons of information there about the sightings in Point Pleasant, the actual interviews of the people that saw Mothman during that period. And they also have a lot of stuff there about the Silver Bridge falling, and so that was very helpful. The guys that opened that, they have a book that's they do have a book out that goes with the Mothman, and then John Keel's book Mothman's Prophecies. Those were interesting to hear all of their versions. My book takes place in Point Pleasant and also in Amsterdam, New York, because the soldier that Mothman is after that I have in my book, he fled to Amsterdam, New York, and built his home there. And that's the only place that they're protected from Mothman. He's not able to get in. And Mothman knows that there are things in there that he needs to destroy so that this family won't know how to destroy him. So I traveled to Amsterdam, New York, and walked along the Mohawk River because I have my character spending a lot of time at the river. And so yes, and then I walked Point Pleasant. There are places in there. I wanted my characters, like Michael's dad. There's a tragedy that happens with him in Point Pleasant, and there's a specific reason that I had him be killed there, because it had the street and the bridge have that's like the ground line that happened back in the 1700s between the Shawnee tribe and the militia.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. And it's amazing that you were able to incorporate so many different facets into your story and do so much research in quite a wide area of land. You weren't just looking locally, you were able to travel.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a pretty fun visit?
It was really interesting. There's a little bookstore there in Amsterdam. And so I stopped in there and got to know the owner, and it was very, very fun trip.
Okay. What was your biggest challenge with incorporating a legend into your story? What things if any, did you come up across that made it difficult? Obviously, the research and knowing things, the details that would make your story ring true. Was there anything else that made it challenging?
I can't really think of any challenges. No, it's when I was able to gather the information, it just really pretty much flowed together.
Okay. Okay. When you were doing your research, were you taking notes or were you recording on like dictation? How did you keep everything straight that you'd collected?
I just had a notebook and I did keep notes, but when I was in New York, I took photos of the area. And then I also took photos in Point Pleasant.
Okay. And did you refer back to them as you were writing to get your details and stuff like
Yes.
that?
Yes.
You are really, really interactive with your audience. I know you do a ton of book signings. Are most of the people that you meet who are interested in your book, are they people who already know Mothman or are interested in your book because it features Mothman? Or is it more typical that your audience comes to you and reads Mothman, your book, and then goes, I should learn all about Mothman? Can you tell from your interactions with your audience which way that typically goes?
Mm-hmm. Well, I put this banner up behind me today because I take that with me to book signings. And usually people do that right away, those red eyes, and they'll kind of gravitate towards that. And the people that are familiar with Mothman, I just see like this, their faces light up and I can see them already saying the word Mothman as they walk towards me. So I know that they're familiar with the character and it's great talking to them and telling my version of how Mothman was created. And then others, I will have people come up and say, you know, I saw the movie, but Mothman Prophecies, but I'm not really sure what Mothman is all about. And they love to hear all the background about Mothman. They really enjoy all of that.
Okay, so you have some people who are aware of the legend, and then some people who know that it's a legend but don't really know what the legend is, and you kind of get to introduce them and teach them.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, that's about all I have question-wise. Do you have any other advice for our viewers when it comes to researching or to incorporating a legend into a fictional story?
Actually, the one book that I wanted to mention was Mothman Facts and Legends. That's the one that was written and is available at the Mothman Museum. The other book, which I found was absolutely wonderful, is this book. It's called American Language, and it's volume 35. It's Shawnee. So you can, it goes either English to Shawnee, and you can learn how to speak the language. And I was able to incorporate some of the Shawnee language in my book, which I really enjoyed. The other thing, just advice in general, as far as especially with writing historic fiction or really any kind of writing, is I would say, as far as marketing, not to put yourself inside a box and think, okay, I either need to do book signings at book fairs or I need to do book signings at libraries, because I've been surprised this year by a few other ways that I have able to market my book. One was I was contacted by a school teacher, and she was having folklore week in her class, and she wanted to know if I could come there and speak about Mothman, but I wasn't able to go. However, I did put together a packet for her that she could use to teach the class with on who, the information about Chief Cornstalk how the myth was created about Mothman. And then I put information in there on some different words, Shawnee language, so they could learn some new words. And then the last thing that I did was I had my book cover printed off in an 8x10 photo for all 40 kids in the class. And I autographed those and sent those to her for her week. And then after they did all of the classwork, they were able to take a bus and go to the Mothman Museum, which kind of made their week. But the surprise that I had was that the students took those photos that I had autographed, and they all put them in the front cover of their notebook, so that their notebooks on the front were my book. So I've got like
That's
40
really
kids
neat.
walking around with my book cover on their notebook. How awesome is that?
That is awesome.
And then the other thing that surprised me was I was recently, I had a director of a senior center approached, said that they had a book club there at the senior center, and they just devoured books. They love to read because they have a hard time getting out to do other things. And so they all had ebooks, and he wanted to know if my Mothman book was on ebook, and if so, they were all going to download it and read it, and then they are going to call, like we're doing today, and have an author session where they could ask me questions. And I don't think that I would have thought of either of those. So there are definitely lots of ways to market your book.
That's really neat. It's really neat that you've had so many different opportunities. I think we don't always think outside the box as authors a lot of times, especially if we're indie or if we're small press. We tend to think, Amazon ads and Twitter posts. We don't always think about the bigger stuff. So that's really cool that you've had so many opportunities to do such unusual marketing that obviously is bringing you really close to your readers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I really enjoy being able to share Mothman with readers.
Okay. Well, guys, that's about all the time we have today. Marilyn's information is going to be linked below, along with some information about the Mothman book. And we hope this has been informative, and we hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.